Dawn rose slow over the plains, laying a thin gold line on the fence posts like someone had painted the edges of the world. Marcus Langston was already moving. He worked the latches with hands that remembered sand, salt, and years of carrying more than his share. When he spoke to the horses, his voice dropped into that steady place all living things trusted. Easy now, one at a time. We've got miles to go, but we'll take 'em straight. A chestnut mare nudged his shoulder as if to test him. Marcus smiled. You and me both, he said, brushing dust from her mane. The smell of hay and leather wrapped around him, a kind of prayer he could breathe. The kitchen door creaked open. Naomi leaned against the frame with 2 mugs, steam ghosting out into the morning. Her robe was tied quick and crooked, like sleep had let her go, but not happily. You've been up since 4, she said. That coffee is a peace offering. Best kind, he said, taking the mug. You sleep? Like a mother who hears every coyote, she said. And like a wife who knows her husband thinks he can outrun the sun. He kissed her temple and let the heat of the cup warm his knuckles. I'm not outrunning anything, just keeping pace. She watched him check the gate again, watched the way he counted without looking like he was counting. They stared in town yesterday, she said. The way folks do when they've already decided your story. Let 'em, he said softly. They didn't write it. From the hallway came a thump and a teenage voice. We out of cereal. Elijah, all legs and bedhead, stumbled in, eyes half open. He reached for the box, found only air, and groaned. You're 16, Naomi said. Your superpower is making food vanish. I'll grab some in town, Marcus said. He slid a few bills from the jar and tucked them into his pocket with a list. Feed, fencing staples, breaker switch for the east barn. You're on school and homework, he told Elijah, and then Mrs. Ortiz's delivery. Don't be late. I won't, Elijah said, then looked at his father a beat longer. Dad, Coach asked if I'm still coming out for tryouts. He shrugged. Said some of the boys' parents asked if our kind knew the rules. Marcus's jaw worked once. He set the mug down. What did you tell him? That I know the rules, Elijah said. And I know how to run. Good, Marcus said. Run your race. Make them learn the rules by watching you. Elijah nodded, a small lift in his chest like he'd pocketed a piece of armor. He bumped his father's shoulder on the way out, a wordless thanks. Naomi waited until the door swung shut. You hear how he said it? Like he's already getting used to it. I heard, Marcus said. I don't want him used to it. Neither do I. He reached for her hand. But I want him ready for it. Ready, not hard. She held his fingers. You're good at that. Teaching ready. She paused. But I still hate that we have to. By the time the sun cleared the cottonwoods, Marcus was steering the old pickup along the 2-lane road into town. The radio whispered farm reports and a hymn that had slipped onto the country station by mistake. Faded banners in the plaza promised Founders Day, proud since 1887. Folks sipped coffee outside the diner and lifted chins at people they liked. Some eyes slid away when his truck rolled past. He parked at the feed store and waited a beat, letting the engine tick itself quiet. Inside, the air held the sweet, dry smell of grain and something heavier, like weather that hadn't happened yet. Dale Cooper leaned his elbows on the counter, telling a story with his hands. He was a big man with a face that always looked sunburned, even indoors. When he saw Marcus, the smile stayed on his mouth, but not in his eyes. Morning, Marcus said. He set his list on the counter. 50-pound alfalfa squares. 3 bundles of staples. Breaker switch for a Model 220, and... He glanced at the board. Throw in 2 salt licks. Big spread for one man to handle, Dale said, dragging his eyes slow over the list. Especially someone like you. Marcus didn't blink. I've handled worse. Dale chuckled like he'd been given a good line to play with. That so? Heard you were Navy. Lot of people come back from that and don't know how to be regular no more. I know how to work, Marcus said. That's regular enough. A younger rancher by the door shifted, pretending to study the racks of gloves. A woman in a denim jacket looked down at her phone. The cashier, a teen with acne and an earnest face, fumbled the register keys and whispered, Sorry, as if the mistake was his for being anywhere near this exchange. Cash or card? Dale asked eventually. Card, Marcus said. He slid it across and waited through the slow beep. Dale bagged the staples with more noise than necessary. "You hear about the county commission meeting?" he said, casual like a rattle under a floorboard. "Road easements out your way. Folks say it ain't fair one family holds so much land with so little traffic." Marcus signed without looking up. "We get our traffic just fine. Do you?" Dale said. "Huh." When Marcus lifted the bags into the truck, a pair of men leaned against a post, watching. One spat. "Looks heavy," he said. "You want a hand?" "I've got two," Marcus said, and left it there. He stopped at the grocery for cereal and coffee, nodded to Mrs. Patel at the register, and drove home with the sky opening wider every mile. The ranch unfolded in front of him like a map he could read in his bones. The dark seam of the creek, the climb of the north pasture, the long silver tongue of the windmill. He exhaled, felt all the tight places loosen. He backed the truck near the feed shed and began to unload. By late afternoon, fences were mended where they needed mending, and the horses settled with their hay. Naomi set a pot of beans on the stove and slid cornbread into the oven. Elijah finished his route and came home with dust on his ankles and a grin about a tip that felt like luck. They ate at the table that had belonged to Marcus's father. Its scratches a history book you could touch. "Remember when Grandpa fixed this leg with a penny and a prayer?" Elijah asked, tilting the thing to make it wobble. "Held 5 more years, Marcus said, smiling at the memory. Then his face softened the way it did when he spoke about the man who taught him how to stand. He could fix almost anything but a closed mind. After dinner, Naomi wrapped the extra cornbread and wiped the counters with the rhythm of someone who had learned long ago that order is a kind of love. Marcus fed the fire and sank into the old chair near the hearth, its leather worn to the shape of a man who ended his days tired and grateful. The house breathed around them. Somewhere outside, a coyote called and another answered. Naomi's voice floated from the window. "Marcus," she said low. He stood and came to her side. On the ridge, a string of headlights had appeared. Bright points paused like eyes that didn't blink. A cluster of trucks sat where the dirt road touched the far fence, not moving, not hiding, just watching the way a storm watches a field. "They're watching again," she whispered. "They've been up there 3 nights this week." Elijah came to the window too, shoulders tight. "Want me to call Ryan?" he asked, testing the name like a password. "Not yet," Marcus said. He kept his voice even and low, the way he did when a horse shied at a shadow. He rested a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Fear likes noise. We'll give it quiet." Naomi turned to him, searching his face the way you search a sky for signs. "How long do we have to live like this?" "We live," he said. "Not like anything. We live." He kept his eyes on the ridge. The trucks idled, then turned one by one, red lights sliding away into the dark. "Let 'em watch." "And if they do more than watch?" Naomi asked. Marcus glanced at his father's photo on the mantel. Broad shoulders, a stubborn jaw, a gaze like a fence post set deep. He felt the old lessons settle into his spine. "Then they'll see," he said, voice quiet and sure. "What a man stands for when the smoke clears." Naomi held his gaze a long breath. Then she nodded. "Then we pray the smoke clears fast." He put an arm around her and pulled her in, the 3 of them a small, firm circle in the soft light. Outside, the land stretched into night, carrying secrets and promises both. Inside, the fire popped, the clock ticked, and a resolve older than the house took its seat at the table. The fire had burned low when Marcus woke again. He didn't know what had stirred him, some instinct honed from years of patrols, perhaps, but his body knew before his mind caught up. There was movement outside, faint and wrong, like wind that had lost its rhythm. He sat up, bare feet on the cold floorboards, and listened. A second later, the sound came. First a soft pop, then a roar that tore through the stillness. "Marcus!" Naomi's voice was high and terrified. "The barn!" He was already running. Outside, the night pulsed orange, flames leaping higher than the roof. Horses screamed inside their stalls, and Elijah stumbled out of the house barefoot, eyes wide. Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed the water pump hose, aimed for the doorway, and shouted, "Cut the latch! Get them out!" Elijah grabbed the bolt cutter and broke open the first gate. A mare bolted, kicking sparks, then another. The heat was unbearable, licking at their faces, sucking the air out of their lungs. Naomi dragged the garden hose over, hands shaking but steady enough to spray down the fence line to stop the fire's crawl. By the time they'd freed the last horse, the roof caved in. The sound was a long, low moan followed by a crash that sent a wave of ash into the air. Elijah coughed, eyes red. Marcus put an arm around his son's shoulder, chest heaving, and looked at what was left. The barn that his father had built board by board was now a glowing skeleton against the sky. Naomi fell to her knees, sobbing into her hands. The flames reflected in her tears. Marcus walked toward the ranch house to get his phone and froze. On the side of the wall, painted in thick black spray, the words dripped down like poison. Know your place. He stared at the words until they blurred. Elijah saw them next, his body trembling with rage. They did this, he said, voice breaking. Those men from town. I know it. Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked at the smoke curling into the dark, then said quietly, Get your mother inside. When the sheriff arrived hours later, the world had turned gray again. The flames were out, but everything smelled of loss. Sheriff Porter stepped out of his cruiser with the lazy gait of a man who had already decided what he believed. Looks bad, he said, glancing at the barn. Could be an accident. An accident. Marcus's voice was raw. Gas cans moved. Doors unlatched. My animals scattered. You call that an accident? The sheriff shrugged. Maybe you left something running. Happens when folks get careless. Elijah started forward, but Marcus raised a hand, stopping him. We found tire tracks, he said evenly. 2 sets, pick up an ATV, leads west. The sheriff smirked. You people always think you're being targeted. Something cold rippled through Marcus. You people? He repeated quietly. The words landed like stones. The sheriff cleared his throat, suddenly less sure. Don't twist my words, Langston. Just saying, maybe there's more to this than you think. I've seen enough, Marcus said. You'll do your job, or I'll find someone who will. The sheriff turned away, muttering, Sure you will, before walking back to his car. The tires spun a little too fast in the gravel. Naomi stood in the doorway, clutching a framed photo she'd pulled from the rubble, the only thing untouched. It was of Marcus and his father, standing in front of the same barn now in ashes. The glass was cracked, but the faces inside were whole. He built this for you, she said, her voice shaking. He said this land would finally be free of shame. Look what they've done. Marcus knelt beside her, resting a hand on hers. They burned wood, Naomi, not us. Elijah stood behind them, fists balled. They think we'll just take it. They think we'll stay quiet. Marcus looked up at him, eyes steady. You think silence is weakness? It sure looks like it, Elijah snapped. Marcus rose, his voice hardening. It's strength. Silence is what keeps your aim straight when the world's shouting in your ear. He paused, his throat tight. But don't mistake quiet for surrender. We're still standing, aren't we? Elijah looked away, angry tears rolling down his face. For how long? Marcus didn't answer, not yet. He couldn't promise safety. Not here, not now. When night fell again, the wind carried a bitter tang of burnt cedar and smoke. Marcus sat alone outside, the land around him scarred and hollow. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote cried, its voice thin but alive. He reached down, scooping a handful of ash into his palm. The black dust clung to his skin, staining the lines of his fingers. He let it fall slowly through the cracks. They can take the land, he whispered, his voice almost gone. But not the man. The phone rang then, an unfamiliar number. He hesitated before answering. Langston? A voice said, rough with time. It's Hale. Ryan, Marcus breathed. Been a long time. I saw the news, Ryan said. Heard about the fire. You need help, brother? Marcus's jaw tightened. They burned everything, Ryan. My father's dream. My family's peace. Then you let me come down there, Ryan said. We'll set it right. I'm not asking for help, Marcus said. His voice was quiet, but it carried something heavy and final. I'm asking for witnesses. There was a pause on the line. Then Ryan said softly, You've got 'em. The wind picked up, rustling the charred fence posts like bones whispering in the dark. Marcus sat there until the stars faded, and the first blush of morning returned. The sun rose red over the ashes, casting long shadows across the ground. Naomi opened the door, stepping out quietly. You didn't sleep again, she said. He shook his head. Didn't need to. What now? Marcus turned his gaze toward the horizon. Now, he said, voice steady, we remember who we are. And we make sure they do too. He picked up a broken fence post, started clearing the ruins piece by piece. Each motion was slow, deliberate, like prayer disguised as labor. And somewhere in that rising light, something in Marcus shifted from grief to purpose, because this wasn't just a man who'd lost his home. This was a man they'd tried to break, one who'd learned long ago that fire only proves what can't be destroyed. For the next 3 days, the Langston Ranch was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the world is holding its breath. Smoke still clung to the fences and fields, a faint reminder of everything they had lost. Marcus worked alone from dawn to dusk, refusing to rest. He repaired what little could be salvaged: wire, hinges, pieces of wood that still held shape. Not because the effort made sense, but because it kept his hands busy when his heart wanted to rage. Naomi watched him from the porch, her fingers twisted around the hem of her apron. "You can't fix it all, Marcus," she said softly one afternoon. "Some things are meant to be mourned." He didn't look up. "Mourning doesn't build fences, but it lets you breathe," she replied. Marcus hammered another nail hard enough to splinter the post. "Breathing comes later." Elijah stood a few yards away, staring at the ashes where the barn used to be. He'd spent every night since the fire replaying it in his mind. The heat, the screams, the smell of burning wood. And every time he came to the same question: why us? Finally, he said it out loud. "Dad, why do they hate us so much? You never hurt anyone. You served your country. You follow every law. What did we do?" Marcus froze, the hammer still in his hand. He looked at his son, the boy's voice shaking with confusion and anger, and saw a reflection of his own younger self, the version that once asked his father the same thing. He set the hammer down slowly and walked toward him. "Listen to me, son," Marcus said, his voice low but firm. "Their hate isn't about us. It's about fear. Men like that see what we build, and it reminds them of everything they wasted. They hate what they can't understand, and they fear what they can't destroy. But they did destroy it," Elijah said, his eyes brimming. "Look around." "They burned everything," Marcus nodded. "They burned wood, not worth. They burned walls, not will. You hear me? They didn't win anything here." Elijah turned away, shaking his head. "It doesn't feel like that. Feels like we're just waiting for them to come back." Marcus's jaw clenched. He wanted to tell his son that everything would be fine, that justice would come. But the truth was bitter and old, and it had taught him never to rely on promises from men who never saw him as equal. "We're not waiting," he said finally. "We're preparing." That night, after Naomi and Elijah went to bed, Marcus sat alone in his study. What was left of it? The shelves were blackened, the air still thick with smoke. He opened the drawer of his father's desk and pulled out a small metal box. Inside was a folded flag, a service medal, and a picture of his Navy SEAL unit. A dozen men in dusty uniforms, arms draped over each other's shoulders. They looked fearless, untouchable, men who'd fought for freedom, for honor, for a country that still measured worth by skin. He ran his thumb over one of the faces. Commander Ryan Hale, the man who'd saved his life in a firefight overseas. The man who'd called 2 nights ago. The man who understood what brotherhood really meant. Marcus turned on the old computer, typed a message, and read it twice before hitting send. Subject: they burned it down. "Ryan, you once said we don't leave our own behind. I'm not calling for backup. I'm calling for truth. If you still believe in that, meet me here." He leaned back in his chair, exhaled, and stared at the blinking cursor. The message felt like opening an old wound. One part pride, one part desperation. But it was done. The next morning, Naomi noticed the change. Marcus moved differently, slower in body, sharper in mind. "You're planning something," she said, narrowing her eyes. He didn't deny it. "I'm taking control back. By doing what?" "By making sure this doesn't happen again," he said. "Not to us. Not to anyone who looks like us and tries to build something." Naomi stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I can't lose you, Marcus. You think they won't come after you if you push back?" He placed a hand on her cheek. They already came. "I'm just answering the door." That afternoon, Marcus drove into town again. The stairs were colder now, sharper. He walked into the sheriff's office, his presence filling the doorway. Sheriff Porter looked up from his desk, frowning. "Langston." Something I can do for you? Marcus laid a printed copy of the graffiti photo on the desk. This was on my wall. Tire tracks. Gas residue. You gonna call that an accident too? Porter sighed. Look, I told you. We're still investigating. You can't just accuse people because you don't like them. Marcus leaned forward. I'm accusing no one. I'm giving you a chance to do your job, the sheriff smirked. Maybe you brought this on yourself. Folks around here don't take kindly to outsiders trying to act like kings. Marcus straightened slowly, his voice calm but cutting. I served this country in places you wouldn't last an hour. I bled for men who didn't care what color I was. Don't talk to me about kings. I've seen real men, and you're not one of them. For a moment, the room went dead silent. Then Marcus turned and walked out, leaving the sheriff red-faced and fuming behind his desk. When he got home, Elijah was waiting by the gate. You went to the sheriff again? Marcus nodded. Yeah, did it help? Marcus paused. Not yet. But I didn't go there for help. I went to remind him I'm not scared. That night, the hum of an approaching engine cut through the quiet. Naomi stepped to the window, her heart quickening. But this time, the lights weren't from town trucks or strangers on the ridge. They were unmarked vehicles, matte black with no plates, pulling up slow and steady down the dirt road. Elijah peered out. Who's that? Marcus's voice carried a strange calm. Friends, he said. The kind that don't knock twice. The doors opened and men stepped out, broad-shouldered, disciplined, eyes scanning the perimeter before even greeting him. One by one they approached, each with the same quiet respect. Commander Ryan Hale was the last to step forward. His hair had gone gray at the temples, but his handshake was as firm as ever. Still standing tall, I see, Ryan said, looking at the burned barn. Still standing, Marcus replied. That's what counts. Ryan's gaze hardened. We heard what happened. We're here because brotherhood doesn't expire. Naomi watched from the porch, tears welling up, unsure whether from fear or relief. For the first time in weeks, Marcus's eyes softened. Welcome home, boys, he said quietly. And in that moment, in the smell of smoke, the weight of ashes, and the sound of tires settling into dirt, Marcus Langston knew something had changed. They'd tried to erase him. Instead, they had just given him reason to rise. By morning, the Langston Ranch was no longer silent. The low hum of generators, the clang of tools, and the steady rhythm of footsteps filled the air. 15 men, veterans from different corners of the country, moved across the property with precision. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need orders. They simply worked, their unspoken language built from years of shared danger and trust. Naomi stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching them. They look like soldiers, she said quietly. Marcus adjusted his hat, eyes scanning the perimeter. They are, but this isn't war, Naomi. Feels like one. He sighed, his gaze distant. Then maybe it's time I stop pretending we're not in one. Ryan approached. A blueprint rolled in his hand. We've got eyes on every corner, he said. Cameras, sensors, motion lights, all powered and linked to a secure feed. Anyone sets foot on this land again, we'll see them coming before they smell the wind shift. Appreciate it, Marcus said. Ryan studied his old friend for a moment. You sure you want to stay here? You could start fresh anywhere, Marcus shook his head. If I leave, they win. This land is my father's name written in soil. I'm not letting anyone erase it. Ryan nodded, understanding. Then we'll make sure they can't. By midday, the men gathered under the lone oak near the corral, the same tree where Marcus's father once rested after long work days. The Texas sun burned high, casting shadows that stretched long across the dry ground. We don't retaliate, Marcus said, his voice carrying authority but not anger. We don't burn what they already tried to destroy. We protect, we record, and we stand. If we act like them, we lose the only thing that makes us different. Ryan smirked slightly. Still the same man who used to quote restraint in the middle of a firefight. Marcus met his eyes. Restraint doesn't mean weakness. It means control, and that's something they'll never have. As evening came, the mood shifted. One of the men, a quiet Latino named Torres, set up a camp stove near the barn ruins. The smell of chili and fresh cornbread drifted across the yard. Elijah hovered nearby, wide-eyed at the sight of the soldiers laughing softly, sharing stories. Ryan motioned for him to sit. You his boy? He asked. Elijah nodded. Yes, sir, Ryan smiled. Your dad saved a lot of lives out there. The least we can do is help him protect what matters now." Elijah looked down, embarrassed but proud. "He never talks about it." "That's because the ones who've seen too much don't need to," Ryan said, his tone warm. "But make no mistake, your father's one of the best men I've ever known." Marcus joined them, setting down a plate of food. "You giving my son war stories again, Commander?" "Only the ones that make you sound good," Ryan joked. They laughed, but the sound didn't last long. The growl of an engine broke the calm. A pickup truck slowed near the main road. Too slow, too deliberate. The same ridge that once held watchers now held warning. Torres muttered, "We've got company." Marcus squinted toward the headlights. The truck didn't pull in. It just sat there, engine idling, one door slightly open. Then a sound like a crack, a gunshot, tore through the silence. The bullet hit the dirt near the corral. Elijah gasped, and Naomi screamed from the porch. Marcus raised his hand, calm but firm. "Everyone down." The SEALs moved like water, precise and disciplined. No panic in their steps. 2 men flanked left, one slipped into the shadows. Within seconds, the truck peeled off, tires spitting gravel, taillights disappearing into the night. Ryan turned to Marcus. "You still think this isn't war?" Marcus's eyes followed the disappearing red glow. "It's not," he said quietly. "It's cowardice." Later that night, as the others slept in shifts, Marcus sat with Ryan on the porch steps. The moonlight washed over the land, silver and ghost-like, showing scars that even darkness couldn't hide. "You ever get tired of fighting, Ryan?" Marcus asked. Ryan took a long breath. "Yeah, but sometimes fighting's the only thing that reminds you you're still alive." Marcus nodded slowly. "They think they can scare me off this land. They don't understand. I've faced men with guns, grenades, and no conscience. Fear stopped working on me a long time ago." Ryan smiled faintly. "Then what's next?" Marcus looked toward the horizon. "Next, we make sure the truth gets seen." The following morning, a dust-covered SUV pulled up the drive. A woman stepped out, tall, mixed-race, confident, carrying a press badge clipped to her collar. "Dr. Dana Ruiz," she introduced herself. "Freelance journalist. I'm here because a story like yours doesn't stay buried forever." Naomi hesitated. "How did you even hear about us?" "Let's just say small towns talk," Dana said. "And so do ex-military networks." Marcus studied her, weighing trust against instinct. "You're not afraid to print what people don't want to read?" "I didn't come here for approval," she replied. "I came for truth. You tell me what happened, I'll make sure the world sees it." Marcus exchanged a glance with Ryan. Then, without a word, he nodded. By the end of that week, Dana's article went live. Decorated Black Veterans Ranch burned in suspected hate crime. Local sheriff under fire for inaction. The story spread fast, first online, then across the state, then nationally. Cameras showed the charred remains of Langston Ranch, the defaced wall, and the quiet dignity of a man who refused to leave. Reporters flooded the town. Federal agents arrived soon after. For the first time, the same people who once whispered behind Marcus's back now whispered his name with respect and fear when the sheriff's corruption surfaced, his ties to Dale, Cooper and the cartel's smuggling routes through rural Texas. The illusion of authority shattered. Arrests followed. So did outrage. Marcus didn't celebrate. He just stood in the yard, hat in hand, the wind brushing through the open fields where fire had once raged. Naomi joined him, sliding her arm through his. "You did it," she said softly. He shook his head. "No, we did. You, me, Elijah. Every man who stood here when it mattered." She smiled through tears. "So what now?" He looked out across the rebuilt fence line, the sunlight glinting off new wire. "Now we start over. But this time they'll remember." Ryan approached, handing Marcus a wooden sign the men had carved overnight. "Dread Langston Ranch, Freedom's Ground." Marcus ran his fingers over the letters, the weight of the name sinking into him like a vow. When he hammered it into place, the sound echoed across the plains, steady, strong. "Now, they came to erase us," Marcus said quietly. "But all they did was make sure the world would never forget our name." And as the wind carried the smell of fresh earth instead of ash, the Langston family stood together, unbroken, unafraid, and home again. Weeks passed. and what had begun as tragedy slowly turned into something far greater than revenge. The Langston Ranch became a symbol, not just for one family's endurance, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The air that once carried the scent of smoke now held the steady rhythm of rebirth. New fences rose, the soil was replanted, and the same land that hate tried to destroy began to bloom again. Marcus worked alongside his old Navy brothers, their laughter occasionally breaking through the hum of construction. They were soldiers again, not on foreign soil, but on the battleground of justice and dignity. The news reports had spread far and wide, stirring outrage and support across the nation. Donations poured in from veterans, civil rights groups, and ordinary citizens who saw themselves in Marcus's struggle. "You reminded us," one letter read, "that dignity doesn't ask for permission, it demands recognition." The federal investigation moved swiftly. Sheriff Porter, the man who once mocked Marcus, was indicted for obstruction of justice and conspiracy with cartel associates. Dale Cooper and his men were captured during a raid that Marcus himself quietly helped plan, providing surveillance footage from the very cameras they'd installed. The cartel's local operation was dismantled in days, its roots yanked from the same soil where Marcus's father had once planted faith. But despite the public victories, Marcus kept his heart grounded. He refused interviews, refused to turn his pain into performance. When a journalist asked why he hadn't spoken on national television, Marcus replied simply, "I didn't fight for applause. I fought for peace." Elijah, once angry and restless, began to change too. Working beside his father and the veterans, he learned that strength wasn't about how loud you shouted, but how long you stood. One evening he said quietly, "Dad, I used to think you were too calm, that you didn't fight back enough." Marcus smiled, brushing dust off his hands. "Sometimes, son, fighting back means staying still when they expect you to break." Naomi became the emotional center of the community. She organized rebuilding drives, helped other families affected by the cartel's corruption, and hosted neighborhood dinners under the rebuilt barn roof, now painted bright red, the color of endurance. What had once been a place of destruction had become a place of gathering. People who once crossed the street to avoid the Langstons now brought casseroles and stories of apology. Not everyone changed, but enough did to make a difference. On a crisp Sunday morning, a ceremony was held at the ranch. Veterans from across the country gathered, along with reporters, local officials, and families from nearby towns. Ryan Hale stood at the front, a folded flag in his hands. "This man," he said, nodding toward Marcus, "taught us that battles don't always happen overseas. Sometimes they happen right where you live, and sometimes the enemy isn't men with guns, but the silence of those who look away." When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he took the stage reluctantly, hat in hand. The crowd quieted, waiting for him to deliver something grand, something fiery. Instead, his words were plain, but they carried more power than any speech rehearsed for applause. "They burned my home," he began, his voice steady. "They thought they could make me afraid. But fear's a choice, and I stopped choosing it a long time ago. I built this land once with my father's hands. I rebuilt it with my own. And when the fire came, it reminded me that walls fall, but will doesn't. You can destroy what a man owns, but not what he stands for." He paused, scanning the crowd. "This isn't about one ranch, one family, or one act of hate. It's about who we decide to be when hate knocks on our door. I didn't fight to prove I was stronger. I fought to remind the world that I was equal." The applause that followed wasn't explosive. It was reverent, like a prayer carried on wind. The sound rolled across the open plains, through the fences, across the repaired stables, into the soil that had absorbed so much pain, and now, finally, peace. Later that evening, as the crowd dispersed, Marcus stood alone by the new barn, his hand resting on the wood. Naomi joined him, slipping her arm through his. "You did it," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "No, we endured it. There's a difference. And now?" He looked out at the sunset stretching over the horizon, the same horizon his father once called God's reminder that the day always ends in light. He exhaled slowly. "Now we rest. Then we teach." As the sun dipped below the hills, the Langston Ranch stood tall again, stronger than before, untouched by fear. The sign at the gate gleamed in the fading light, Langston Ranch, Freedom's Ground. Beneath it, smaller words were carved by hand by Marcus himself. They came to break a man. Instead, they built a legacy. And as the night settled in, the wind carried that truth across the land. A promise, a warning, and a victory written not in flames this time, but in unshakable grace.